Bom dia a todos que nos
Good morning, everyone that are here at this side event of the 40th session of the UN Human Rights Council. This event is happening through the Order of Attorneys in Brazil and the Arns Commission for Human Rights, the Arns Commission. I'm Laura Greenhalgh, a journalist and executive director of the Arms Commission, and I'm going to be the mediator of this event. What reunites us today here is already expressed in the event's title, which is The Erosion of Freedom of Expression in Brazil. We are on live transmission on the OAB YouTube channel and on the Facebook pages of OAB and Ars Commission. Since this is an international event on the program of the UN, it is going to be transmitted with simultaneous translation in English, but it will also be available in Portuguese soon. That said, I'd like to pass the floor to the president of OAB for him to open this event, please. Thank you so much, Laura. Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. I shall start the debate today by saluting my dear friend and Minister of Justice at the time when being a Minister of Justice was really uh, when it had a really correlation between justice and the officer, which is José Carlos Dias, president of the Arms Commission, and one of the promoters, alongside the Order of Attorneys of Brazil, of this side event to the 40th session of the UN Human Rights Council. I thank and salute Mrs. Irene Khan, Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression at the United Nations, who could not come due to her agenda. And I would like to especially thank our guests of this morning, Patricia Campos Mello, this brilliant journalist who has been contributing to the Brazilian journalism in these difficult times, Laura Greenhalgh, which is a journalist and also a very important political articulator, and also my friend Pierpaolo Bottini, one of the best criminal lawyers in our country, who has been granted the Order of Attorneys. His talent and his dynamic by observing the freedom of expression in the country. And I'd like to also salute especially Felipe Neto, who was transformed in a social influencer, but also in a political activist for freedom in Brazil, and also the political and literary brilliantism of Paulo Coelho, who is transforming this event into a special event. The Order of Attorneys of Brazil, which I have the honor to represent here, is the entity that gathers more than 1,200,000 male and female lawyers in Brazil, and which has the mission of defending human rights and social justice established in our Constitution. The human rights, in order to fulfill this constitutional duty, the Order of Attorneys of Brazil is here today. Rui Barbosa, a Brazilian jurist and journalist, once said, words upset arbitrary states because words are the irresistible instrument of conquering freedom. Let it be free, wherever it may be, and despotism will be dead. Because today, words and freedom are under attack in Brazil. This fundamental right that was achieved after so much fighting is being threatened. The constant intimidation of press professionals, especially female journalists, the threat against those that think differently or are political opponents of the current government, the criminal persecution by the state of indigenous leaderships and social movements activists, and the censorship of scientists raise a red flag for attentive Brazilians. Here today with this debate, and from the testimonies of our guests, we call out the world's attention to this serious threat. This is a space of denouncement, but also of commitment. We will not allow arbitrariness to supplant freedom. We will not allow darkness to prevent the coming of light. And we will not allow obscurantism to undermine our ways. So at last, we are here following the words of the great Brazilian writer Guimarães Rosa. What life wants from us is courage. Let's continue firmly and with courage in all spaces to prevent silence from taking us over. Thank you so much, everyone. I wish everyone a great debate. I pass the floor to the president and founder of Arms Commission, José Carlos Dias, former Minister of Justice. I like to say that I'm very emotional of participating in this event. My dear President Felipe Santa Cruz, who is here today, representing the lawyers and also the great absent father who was my client. The extraordinary figure of Paulo Coelho is the first opportunity that I have to look at your face. I have already read all of your books, but I have the opportunity to look at your face and make a statement of respect and love for everything that you have been doing to Brazil. Pierpaolo Bottini, you were a big boy and you were already brilliant as a lawyer, and you did it all right. And now you're one of the greatest lawyers in Brazil. Felipe Neto, I have the uttermost respect to you and like to honor you as well. Patricia, you're the muse of freedom of expression in Brazil. And I like to say and like to share my happiness of participating alongside you in this event. My dear Laura, who shines so much in the Arms Commission. We are here today because we have been falling. Brazil has been falling. This is the painful feeling that I have. I'm a lawyer for more than 50 years. And for more than 50 years, I've been living and I've been fighting for democracy. However, during the military dictatorship, when I was a lawyer of more than 500 political persecuted people, I felt in my hands the need to fight for democracy, and we did it. Today, my biggest fear is that we are going to go back, we are going to retrocede. My participation at the National Truth Commission wanted to demonstrate what I want the young people to see, that there was a dictatorship and we must not let it repeat. My fear is that this dictatorship repeats again. We need to hold on and fight against. We need to use our voices in order for this not to repeat itself. The forests that are dying, the indigenous people who are being persecuted, the journalists that are silenced, the students that don't have access to a dignified education anymore. All of these shows that we are really suffering a very difficult moment. And also, more than ever, we are obligated to a duty with democracy, to freedom. These must be our motto. These must be the reason for us to get together. because this justifies our presence here today. Paulo Coelho in Switzerland, Pedro Paulo, I don't know where he is, Patricia, I also don't know, but we are all here as a miracle of technology, together in this gallery of voices fighting for democracy and freedom. May God help us and bless us. We were born as the professionals that we are in order to fight for freedom. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. And other people are not here because they were killed. They are not here because they were silent. So, this is the time to say enough, enough. We don't want we don't want to we have the obligation, the moral obligation to ourselves, to our children, to our grandchildren, and to our fathers to state that democracy is the only solution to this to the situation that we have, to fight for freedom and freedom of expression, a free press. That's what we need. This is the great weapon that we have to fight against this very painful moment that Brazil is living. Thank you so much.
Obrigada, presidente Zé
Thank
Carlos.
you so much, President José
Só para informar,
Carlos.
essa conversa estará em português
So
e
I
em breve
repeat,
nas
this
redes
debate is
sociais
going
das
to
nossas
be in
páginas. No momento,
Portuguese
está
on
sendo
our social
transmitida
networks. At the moment, it is being
simultânea no
translated
streaming
live
do Circuito ONU.
since it's
Bom,
a
eu
UN
queria dizer para
event.
vocês que a organização dos
So I'd like
repórteres
to
dos Órgãos
say
Sem
to you
Fronteiras de
that the
outubro da
organization
Patrícia
of
apontou
Reporters Without
que
Borders
mais de
has
30
released a recent
instituições
report
internacionais
pointing out
governamentais
that
como
more than
pregadores da
30
liberdade de imprensa.
state
O
leaders
presidente brasileiro, Jair
are against
Bolsonaro,
freedom of
se
expression. The
encontra
Brazilian
entre os
president,
membros
José
de uma
Bolsonaro,
companhia
is
de
within this
ditadores
group
mais tiranos.
alongside some
O
tyrants
estudo
and
situa o
dictators.
Brasil na zona
This study
vermelha dos
situates
países que
Brazil in the
restringem a
red
liberdade de imprensa.
zone of
Ele
countries that
reforça
restrict freedom of
já
expression
dados
and
do último
reinforces
relatório da Associação
some
Brasileira
data
de
that was
Emissores de
already
Rádio e Televisão.
gathered
Em
by the
2020,
Brazilian
foram
Association
mais de
of Radio and
150
Television
casos de
Broadcasters.
violação da liberdade de
There were
expressão no Brasil,
hundreds of
mais que o
cases
dobro do
of
registrado em 2019.
acts against freedom of expression.
68 jornalistas foram ofendidos,
68
39
journalists were
jornalistas
offended,
físicos.
39 of them with physical
Nessas
assaults.
atividades, o
And
presidente
also,
brasileiro, ele próprio,
the
se
Brazilian president
encarrega de
itself,
fixar a
himself,
seguinte mensagem:
he's,
a
he
imprensa
sent
não é
the following
confiável,
message:
os
the press
jornalistas
is
são
not
todos
reliable,
iguais, portanto, a
journalists are
imprensa não
all
precisa existir.
not
A
to be
mensagem
trusted, and
foi para
so the
todas as
press
áreas.
shouldn't exist. His
Ataques
message
dessa
is that
natureza têm sido reverberados
attacks of this
por rádio, por
nature
redes
have been
bolsonaristas, e os
reverberating
mais
on
violentos e
internet
tendenciosos desses
places,
ataques
and
têm
these attacks
causado
are becoming
tragédia
more
humanizada na
aggressive.
imprensa.
And
Nós
it's
terminamos
worse
com
when it
muita
affects a
educação,
female
muita
journalist.
admiração
So
e muito
it's
respeito
with a
que eu
great
passo a
honor and a
palavra à
great
minha
respect
colega
that I
junto
pass the
com o
floor to my
presidente
fellow
Lula.
colleague,
Patrícia foi correspondente do
Patricia
Jornal
Mello,
Nacional, é
who
repórter
was
especial da
a
Folha de S.Paulo, da jornalista
correspondent,
da
an
Expressão,
international
e é autora
correspondent,
do
a
livro
journalist for
Vencedora.
the Folha de S.Paulo,
Hoje,
and
muitas
also
vozes
the author of the
clamam
book
sobre
The
fake
Hate
news e
Machine
violência digital.
on
Patrícia, por
digital
favor.
violence and fake news. Patricia, please, the
Obrigada,
floor is
Laura.
yours. Thank you so
Agradecer
much, Laura.
ao
I'd like
órgão
to
presidido,
thank
presidente Felipe
the
Santa Cruz,
OAB,
agradecer à Comissão Ares,
represented by Felipe Santa
Comissão Santa
Cruz. I'd like
Cruz.
to thank the Arms
Gente, é uma honra
Commission.
estar aqui com
It's
vocês,
an
junto
honor
com
for me to be
Paulo
here
Coelho,
with
Felipe
you, with
Neto.
Paulo Coelho,
É
Felipe Neto, Pierpaolo
é uma
Bottini,
responsabilidade
and with Laura.
enorme estar
It's a
aqui,
great
apresentar o
responsibility and
programa.
honor to be here, and I thank
Como
for
a
the
Laura começou
opportunity.
dizendo, é muito
As
importante a
Laura
gente pensar que pela
started
primeira
saying,
vez o
it is very
Brasil
impressive
está
that
na
for the
zona
first time Brazil has entered the red
das
zone
repórteres sem
of
fronteiras.
freedom of
O país está
expression
classificado ao lado
in
da
the world.
Nicarágua, da
The,
Rússia,
the country is classified along
um país
Nicaragua,
onde a situação que o país
Philippines, and
passa é muito
Russia,
difícil.
places where the work of the press is considered to be very difficult. The attacks against the press in Brazil here today, most of them, the biggest offender is the President Jair Bolsonaro. There was a recent report last year, and there were 428 attacks against the press, which is more than the double of what happened in 2019. The president was responsible for 49 of the attacks. Unfortunately, the attacks against journalists have become a daily routine in Brazil. In June, for example, Jair Bolsonaro, president, sent a message to a reporter to shut up. He called journalists bastards. And a few days later, he said that a journalist should stop asking stupid questions. And when a reporter asked him about corruption, he said that he would like to punch the journalist in the face. Critiques are welcomed. We from the press, we make mistakes and we need to be accountable for our mistakes, but we are not receiving critiques. We are talking about the killing of our reputation and aggressive attacks. As mentioned by Laura and Felipe Santa Cruz, president, female journalists are the preferred target. Female journalists in Brazil have been subject to campaigns of defamation. The president's supporters attack our appearances. They call us fat, ugly. They, they persecute our family members, and they also make sexual offenses. The son of the president, Eduardo Bolsonaro, and other politicians have already insinuated more than once that, that they would have offered sex to receive information. And they said that on videos that were transmitted to millions of people on Facebook, on the internet. The result is an enormous attack. The president's supporters feel that they have a green light to attack journalists. I received messages that I'm a prostitute, that I should be raped. I received threats against my son, and also phone calls saying that they would punch me. We have already filed a lawsuit against the president, and these attacks are not restricted to the internet. The government's aggressive rhetoric has been leading to violence in the streets as well. At the end of May, a reporter from the CNN television had to be escorted by the police after being expelled by Bolsonaro supporters in a manifestation supporting the president. Supporters were saying, "Communist, trash, what a trash press." A journalist from the newspaper Estado de São Paulo was punched and pushed while covering a manifestation supporting the president and the closing of the Federal Supreme Court in Brasilia. Since May of the last year, most of broadcasting companies, they were not they are not sending reporters to the president's house. After those threats against journalists, media companies are considering that they are not safe to work. The most, the population is the most hindered due to this. The president makes video with his supporters and they don't face scrutiny. Media vehicles supporting president supporters making aggressions. The President of the Republic and some of the ministers have been pressuring big companies to stop announcing on television and newspapers that they are considered non-patriotic. He has already approved two measures to decrease journalism budget at a time that they are facing many difficulties. The government is instrumentalizing institutions and the Ministry of Work to persecute some media broadcasters, such as the Global Television, the biggest company in Brazil. And also, there is judicial harassment. Supporters of the president use the judicial system to persecute journalists systematically. A lot of journalists are threatened by this, me included. Campaigns for information are a strategy of the government. The result is more than 500,000 dead by COVID-19. Many people who believe in the government and who believe in his disinformation campaigns, promoting fake news and promoting the ignoration of social distancing. The president has been affirming that the presidential elections of 2022 are going to be a fraud if there are no changes in the election system. It might be frightening that Brazil is living a moment, an unprecedented moment of erosion of freedom of expression. Brazil is seen to most of the world as a big democracy, as a powerful democracy. But the fact is that the democratic elected president is using disinformation campaigns and attacks against the press and against scientists in order to erode the Brazilian democracy from within, and the Brazilian democracy is facing a big danger. I thank everyone. Thank you so much, Patricia, for this first intervention. I insist we have many requests to have this debate in Portuguese, and I insist that we are having simultaneous translation to English because this debate is inserted within the UN event. But as soon as we are finished, we are going to upload the original sound in Portuguese. So, in this 47th session of the UN Human Rights Council, the special rapporteur for the freedom of expression, she stated the following based on the analysis of hundreds of situations on the world. Disinformation is not a new phenomenon. What is new is how digital technology opens spaces so that fake information is disseminated and amplified by many actors due to political and ideological reasons in a never seen scale. Disinformation online brings serious consequences to democracy and human rights, as we have been seeing in election process as a response to COVID-19 and also in the intensification of attacks against minority groups in the population. In order to manifest and to talk about this subject, I pass the floor to Felipe Neto, who is very known in Brazil, a famous YouTuber with more than 40 million followers in his channels, a political activist, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and also a writer. He has many faces. So, Felipe, please, the floor is yours. Thank you so much, Laura. Good morning, everyone. We have been living dark moments in Brazil today. I'm a very young person. I have 33 years of age. I didn't live through the military dictatorship in Brazil. I was born in the same year of our constitution, so I have the same age of our constitution. And I grew up hearing about the military dictatorship in a very alarming way. And also, I grew up with this fear that this could repeat itself. What I was seeing is a change of narrative, a very strong change of narrative, when young people started to listen to older people that were bringing up light discourses on the military dictatorship in Brazil. These discourses always go to a path of conservatism, and they're outlined by the majority power who are comprised of heterosexual white people and who have been commanding the West in our planet. And we are also living in a situation that because of technology of information, some small groups promoting these violent discourses and that wanted to remember that kind of violence, they have found echo, and through this echo, they managed to elect dark people in Brazil. Brazil is one of them, and also the United States, and also many other countries, as it has been happening in Europe. We have a very alarming situation. What I consider to be very important to state, aside from what has already been stated by Patricia and everyone else, we need to talk about how the Bolsonaro movement in Brazil, and when I talk about Bolsonaro movement, I'm not talking only about the person of Jair Bolsonaro, but his whole group of conservatism in Brazil, how they like to invert the narrative so that they're the ones who are seen as persecuted. And they're going to tell that they're the great defenders of freedom. That's what they like to say. In fact, because they say that nothing should be censored in the internet. And due to this shallow discourse, this empty discourse, people who don't study this theme, they think they're the heroes. So we need to alert this to the whole world. We have the threat of a decree to be released by the President of the Republic wanting to prohibit that social networks may block accounts or delete some content in Brazil. And they say that this is to defend freedom. A new Nazis may have the opportunity to defend white power in Brazil. So president supporters may promote narratives that are completely away from the truth. And, and these may not have any sanction on platforms. That's what the President of the Republic wants to approve in the next weeks. And this has already been supported by some discourses as a provisional measure. This is a direct attack against democracy. All of this is fantasized as the defense of freedom. Everything in technological means must be seen as a narrative. Lay people, when they hear what the president defends, defending that what the person doesn't understand that what they want to prohibit is dark, it's criminal, it's dangerous to society. They use the example of people who are now arrested or to be arrested as an example of persecuted people. People who are persecuted because they committed crimes, and they use this as an argument of ideological persecution or political persecution. This doesn't exist. That's a complete inversion of values. So it is important the world to know that Brazil has been suffering a great threat. If this decree or provisional measure is approved, we are going to have a chaotic internet in Brazil. And social networks won't have the weapons to fight against the violence and the lies promoted by these groups. At the same time, and this is a mark of Bolsonaro's government, at the same time that they're accusing journalists of being angry at the government for having lost money, because at the mind of these people, we would receive a lot of money from previous governments. So they accused, they throw this lie, and at the same time, this current government pays journalists or false journalists that defend this government, as it was recently revealed by newspaper Jornal de São Paulo. There were payments to some journalists or fake journalists defending Jair Bolsonaro. They are receiving money to this. Therefore, there is always an inversion of values, an inversion of narratives, so that they may end up seen as the heroes and we are the ones silencing others. This is not happening in Brazil. So it is important that the whole world knows how Bolsonaro works, and we need to defeat it in 2022 or sooner. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Felipe, for your intervention. Let's see.
Eu gostaria de chamar a atenção aqui para
I would like to call out the attention. We have already said this today, but Brazil has lived a long period when freedom of expression was subject to a dictatorship that happened in Brazil for 21 years. It was a time when journalists were really persecuted, arrested, and killed. We know that. Democracy is what brought back a multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic country, which is our Brazil. And it also brought back a society that desired to express itself freely after a long silence and under a new constitution. But today, now, in face of so many attacks against freedom of expression that you have already expressed here in our debate, we need to defend this achievement. And it is with this provocation that I pass the floor to Pierpaolo Bottini, who is a professor of criminal law at the University of São Paulo and also a coordinator of the Freedom of Expression Observatory of the OAB. So, Pierpaolo, the floor is yours. Thank you so much, Laura. Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to be part of this debate about the freedom of expression in Brazil. I'd like to salute my minister, my master, a person with whom I have a great honor, and also my colleague, Felipe Santa Cruz, who gave me the opportunity to work at this subject. I'd like to salute Paulo Coelho, who I admire as a writer, as a person, also as an activist working for the freedom of expression. I'd like to salute Felipe Neto, who has been following this work for the freedom of expression in Brazil. And also I'd like to salute my friend, journalist, Patrícia Campos Mello, in the name of whom I salute every journalist to start here today citing Rui Barbosa. I love to cite Rui Barbosa. He said that a journalist is a master of first letters and a professor of democracy in action. And that's true. A journalist is exactly that. He's the holder of freedom of expression, whether you like it or not. And when you don't like it, it's when you learn how to live with it. So it's a very big satisfaction to be here on this debate. So talking about this team, talking about censorship, freedom of expression in Brazil, is a little bit of treating about the history of Brazil. If we look at the history of Brazil, we're going to see that there were many conflicts and aggressions against the freedom of expression. In Brazil, the press, the censorship came before the press. The military dictatorship installed censorship in Brazil before the freedom of expression. So we have this sad conviviality with attacks against the freedom of expression. Anyway, currently, we have a federal constitution since 1988, as Felipe said. It's a constitution that made a pact with freedom of expression. It's a safe constitution that defends the freedom of expression, the freedom of intellectual expression and artistic expression. We have on Article 220 of our Constitution the freedom of expression in our country. No law shall contain a regulation blocking the freedom of expression. And there shall not be no political censorship, artistic or ideological censorship. So the freedom of expression in crimes against honor that have very little incidence when we are talking about political authorities, hate incitement, violence incitement. There are limits, but outside of that, the freedom of expression in Brazil is full for any kind of manifestation, every manifestation. Therefore, we have to expect a respect to the freedom of expression in Brazil. However, sadly, we see that in Brazil this is not happening. This is not clear, because if it was clear, we wouldn't be here today on the UN Human Rights Council discussing the erosion of freedom of expression in Brazil. Evidently, the freedom of expression in Brazil is not how it should be. It always brings some discomfort to public authorities, the freedom of expression in Brazil, because these public authorities, they feel disturbed by the freedom of expression. What is unacceptable is a government that organizes public policies to structurally fight against freedom of expression in Brazil as we see today. We have an institutional attack that comes in three forms: a direct attack against journalists, the use of national security law to block everyone who has a more critical stance against the government. And they publish important things regarding the government. We are talking about the political journalist and also the writer, the cultural critique. Every journalist is being subject to intervention, to police intervention. So we are living a systematic attack to everyone who who makes critiques to the government. But there's also an institutional attack against media broadcasters. They are weakening economically journalists. And at last, as you have all said, there's an institutional attack. When the President of the Republic attacks a journalist or a vehicle of the press, he creates a perverse movement, a brutal movement that affects deeply the action of journalists. Alongside what Patricia said, that's a judicial harassment against hundreds of people. And, and they're activating journalists on different parts of the country to defend themselves. So can you imagine what happens to the small journalist, to the small blogger in the countryside? This is a red flag. This points out towards a political stance against freedom of expression, and our national and international mobilization is urgent. There won't be a traditional coup d'etat in Brazil, arresting journalists for their ideological position. What is going to happen? It's a more subtle process. They're first going to open inquiries and then they're going to archive it and they're going to create measures to block press. And at the end, after we know it, the censorship is going to be very strongly there before we perceive this kind of movement. So we need to alert society. Felipe Santa Cruz has been doing his part. We have a letter to inform journalists. We have been recurring to the judiciary, and we need to be intransigent in the defense of freedom of expression. We need to divulge these attacks, attacks against those that defend the freedom of expression. And therefore, we need to be revolutionaries. We need to defend the law. We need to defend the constitution that asserts the right of freedom of expression. It is fundamental that we create a national movement of social society, of professors, social movements, from the right, from the left, from the center. We need to create a movement to defend, to alert about what is happening. I'd like to finish my statement here now with a phrase from Don Quixote when he said at the end, "The freedom, Sancho, is one of the greatest gifts that the heavens have gave the people. It is not equal to the treasures of the earth. And therefore, for freedom and honor, we need to risk our lives. Censor the freedom of expression and protect this." So,
Lembrando
again,
que esta conversa é em português, gente.
lecture.
É convidado, vamos dizer assim. Mas antes eu queria lembrar
But before, I'd like to remind that when everything was not in Brazil, the youth came out of their houses. They took the streets, they read manifestos, they protested in the radio, in books, using their clothes. And to all of that, we were hardly persecuted. My generation, my generation, which my dear friend, the father of Patricia, was a member, that I honor here for his beautiful daughter. We know how things went. They were not easy. And so, when everything was not in Brazil, it's a time that we don't want anymore. Paulo Coelho, a great writer, a member of the Brazilian Academy of Letters, the most translated writer in our world. He also lived that dark night with us. So Paulo Coelho knows why we're here today defending the freedom of expression in our country. Paulo, the floor is yours. And I'd like to call out the attention that it's not only our Paulo Coelho who is going to talk now, but it's a messenger of peace from the UN, a function that was entrusted to him by the Secretary of the United Nations in 2007. The floor is yours, Paulo. Thank you so much, Laura. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to, since I'm not a lawyer, I'd like I'd like to be the devil's advocate today because what I saw from the conversations here, there is a victimization that I don't accept. We are not victims. Do you understand? They have the famous proverb, the word is stronger than a sword. I don't believe in that. I believe that the sword is actually stronger than the word. And we Brazilians, we cannot accept some stuff without questioning. But when Laura talks about the dark night that we went through, we were not victims. We are not victims. We have discovered a very rich form of expression. So, who are we to let this government, this kind of government, Bolsonaro, to interfere in our freedom? Our freedom is ours. We we didn't receive this freedom from them. We are people who have conquered, who have achieved this freedom through sweat, blood, and tears. The father of Felipe Santa Cruz, who unfortunately disappeared, and José Carlos Dia, as I recently have known, a sequence of people being killed and arrested, people who got coward in face of that because people got arrested, got hit, and to raise your head again is not something that happens from one day to another. At the same year of Felipe Santa Cruz, I think it took me 7 years to put all of my pieces together. Well, but I put it together. The thing is, these battles, either they destroy you or make you stronger. In fact, they made me stronger. Someone said something about censorship, and I'm going to say something that may sound like a curse, but the censorship was a source of big creativity to my generation. It's not that censorship is the only source of creativity, but no one was stopped to say what they wanted due to censorship. We see Gil Chico, who was a big, a, how to pass through censorship. There's something in Portuguese that we call jogo de cintura that we must have. And it's not a small aspirer of Stalin in the sense that when we talk about Bolsonaro, I actually believe that people go there to the palace. If they say something that he doesn't like, he removes that person. It's the same horror that Stalin made. If if people would send bad news to the North Korean dictator or Stalin, they don't do it. They only talk about positive things because if you talk about negative things, you risk of being killed. The famous idea of killing a message was born where? It exists since a long, long time. So I think that Bolsonaro only likes people who give him positive news. This reminds me of a famous story, which is the story of the king's new clothes. There were two seamsters arriving at the palace, and they said, "We're going to make you a wonderful cloth with invisible." And then they decided to walk with that cloth through the city. I think that Bolsonaro is kind of like that. What a beautiful garment. And then the king is naked. So I believe that Bolsonaro is much more weak than we imagine. We give him credit that he doesn't know, and he knows that he doesn't know. They're saying that another point that Felipe brought is that I find it dangerous what the full freedom of social networks means. We cannot have something where anything goes and it's okay. What is happening at this moment? Social communities, and per- I'm a person who participates a lot on social communities. I have Facebook, I have 50 million on Twitter, I have around 50 million followers. Unfortunately, most of them is not Brazilian, which limits me. But social communities at this moment, they are a threat to democracy. I'm very sad to state this, but but they are threatening everything. Why? Because they allow not to distinguish what is fake news and what is a true news. So we become lost because you read something. Yesterday, I read in an online portal, a serious online portal, that Japan was going to be closed. They wouldn't be holding, they wouldn't be holding the Olympics. Well, later the news was said to be untrue. So everything that goes on the internet, what occurred is that people only had the first part of the news, and they're going to think that Japan won't hold the Olympics. What is destroying the newspapers? Is it the lack of support from the government? I don't know. I'd ask myself if it's not because today we have news everywhere. Any one of us has a television with 20, 30, 40 news channels. So we become lost amid all of this. The king is dead. I don't think Bolsonaro has all this power. I hope to be right. But I think that despite the communication from the military yesterday, it's not like that. I think that the majority of the army is going to say, wait, we are a very reliable institution. And suddenly In 3 years, the people has nothing good. He might be accommodated, but he's not dumb. So then they go there and they release a decree. Oh, he offended the honor of the army. This, in my time, was called wearing the hood because he talked about a little part of the army that is doing what we know. We are lost if these gets amplified, but it's not getting amplified because we are creative people. We are not people in extinction, as Bolsonaro has said. We are here resisting for a long time. We have resisted long storms and we are going to resist more. And this strengthens us. This week, something really important happened. I don't know if you noted, but and we need to emphasize it. For the first time, Bolsonaro is being associated to the word corruption. He would always say that my government is not corrupt, my son is, but I don't know, and he would escape. But now suddenly, we have this corruption within the government. So, coming back to what I said before, the king is dead. And now the kid comes shouting, wait, it's not like they said that there's no corruption in the government. There is corruption, and it's visible. If you look well at Bolsonaro, you won't, you are not going to see a man in the greatest part of his power. You're going to see a frightened man, a man with fear, a man that attacks with this way because that's the way that he knows how to react. Bolsonaro today is a man with fear. If I was a physician in the president's palace, I would give him tea. I would give Bolsonaro tea for him to be calmer. Because winning and losing is part of life. But to threaten, as he has been threatening, regarding the election results, that's a sign of weakness, of total weakness. So I ask, that's a signal of weakness of someone who knows that he is alone. He's going to be surrounded by people who support him. He is naked, he is shouting. When people start shouting, my friend, we know that things are bad. That guy who comes very quietly and say this and that, that's more dangerous. But Bolsonaro is actually frightened. Look at his values. Look at his eyes. Look at his skin. His skin is bad. What we can see from Bolsonaro, his facial expression, that's something that frightens. That's something from someone who has fear. He's not that powerful. If if military extremists say that kind of absurd, I ask myself, if they're going to say, you have already committed to your time here, so let's stop. That's what I had to say. But coming back to the idea of Stalin, he's killing, 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 killing. He's like the North Korean dictator. You don't have food, kill. One mouth less. Do you understand? So that's what I wanted to say. And let's go forward to our conversation because the Brazilian Association of Journalism has very well defended a synthesis, a capacity for synthesis. Authority is not sustained and has never been sustained. It is going to be only a matter of time.
Tá no mudo, Laura.
Laura, you're muted.
Alô? Obrigada, Paulo.
Hello, thank you so much, Paulo, for your reflection on the king's nakedness. We still have half an hour. I'm going to make a question to each one of you, and if the answers are short, we may complete it, but I ask that the answer must be short. We have like 35 minutes here still. Patricia, you were attacked very hardly through immoral attacks. The attacks were indecent, misogynistic, sexist, to say the least of what you suffered. However, behind it, there's the power, the potency of your investigation work when you started to denounce the sending of fake messages through WhatsApp. So you were attacked in your honor. But what's behind everything is the power of your investigation work. You went to court, you defended yourself, you have already won some lawsuits. Do you feel recovered? You have received several awards as well? Well, thank you so much for the question, Laura. In reality, I'd like to start saying that at the same time that we are facing a very hard time for journalists, since the end of the military dictatorship, we haven't been living through a serious situation like this. The military dictatorship was worse, but we don't want it to be like that. Female journalists are doing incredible things, and that's something that brings us a lot of pride. Joana Dalpiva from Wall, Constança Rezende from Folha. So this use of misogynistic attacks, sexist attacks, it's not something that is happening only against myself. That's how they are operating, because it's in the roots of this populist government that uses digital tools very well. They want to delegitimize the press, because the press is the only moment where we question the power. So the idea is to use these two together, campaigns of disinformation to delegitimize journalists. Having said that, when we decided to suit the president, the son of the president, and other people who have made these kinds of campaigns, the idea was not reparation. The idea was to show that this is not normal and that we cannot accept this. It's not because you were elected to a political post that you have immunity to offend a journalist, to offend anyone. So the reparation was secondary thing. Now, if I have the illusion that this is going to stop, no, I don't think this is going to stop. This is the nature of this government. So, for example, a week later from the victory against Eduardo Bolsonaro regarding this process of moral harm, he repeated the same offenses 1 week later. That's their nature. But it must be our nature to point out that this is not going to be tolerated. This is not normal. We are going to do justice. So I think that female journalists are doing something really beautiful. They are bringing us a lot of pride. And on the other side, it is very important for us to point out that this is not
Obrigada.
normal, that we are not going to be
Exatamente. A
silenced.
gente tem a
Thank you so
impressão de
much,
que o
Patricia. Sometimes we have the
brasileiro
impression that the
acha que
Brazilian
ele foi
president, he thinks that he
democraticamente.
was
Parece que
democratically elected to be a
exatamente
tyrant, not to be a
o
president.
cargo de presidente dele,
Because
a
the
posição dele,
president
implica
post, his
limites,
position,
implica
has
direitos.
limits, has
Paulo, você quer
duties.
agregar algum aspecto sobre isso?
Do you want to add something about this, Paulo? He, the president is seeing the surveys. He's seeing the brutal decrease of popularity that he has been suffering. And this transforms him into a more dangerous animal in a short period. But he knows that he thought that he was going to be elected to be a tyrant, but he won't achieve
Obrigada,
it.
Paulo. Eu faço uma
Thank you
pergunta
so
para o
much,
Felipe Neto.
Paulo.
Felipe,
I'd like to make a
a gente
question to
está
Felipe
vendo, né,
Neto. Fil-
comparando com
Felipe, we have talked here
tempos
about,
sombrios já vividos no
we
Brasil,
have talked here
de protagonismo,
comparing
né,
the
das teorias
obscurantism of previous
auto
periods of Brazil and the
marcadas
protagonism of the
vítimas.
youth.
Nós
As
éramos
Paulo has stated, we were not
diferentes, né?
victims, we were
Enfrentamos
fighters
coisas e
of a
tivemos
whole
que
order
levar
of
adiante.
things, and we have paid a very high price for this. But
Nas
now,
redes
currently,
sociais,
Felipe,
você é uma
you
presença
are on social networks. You are a very
uma
powerful
voz nas redes
presence,
sociais,
a very powerful voice on social
representante
networks.
da
And at the
população
same time, we
brasileira
see a
que
sector
batalhou
of
muito
the
essas
young
redes sociais
population in Brazil that is following a very backward discourse. Have you ever stopped to think about this, to analyze a little bit of this phenomena? Of course, Laura, this is part of my routine every day. I have never asked for this position of highlight in the political debate because I'm a YouTuber, an entertainment YouTuber. Who follows my work on YouTube? I don't comment on politics. They see me recording videos of games, Minecraft, and children and their grandparents watch together on their living room. I, s- on Twitter, I started as any kind of human in Brazil. I got embarrassed. It is impossible to look what is happening in Brazil now and not become angry. We need to collaborate in order for the Bolsonaro not to win. So when Paulo says that he's not going to pass, he's not going to win, this is a work of many people that have gathered to fight for democracy and the values that matter. And the only reason that I was raised to this position of highlight today is because of the silence of many artists and influencers, the coward silence of those who had to position themselves. And they didn't because they feared losing followers, they feared receiving critiques, and therefore they shut it up in the most important moment. So when Paulo says that at the time of the military dictatorship, we had artists united and using censorship to create, to use their creativity for great works. What we see now in Brazil, unfortunately, is a more frightening scenario. Who leads the music here in Brazil is funk, sertanejo, and the popular Brazilian movement has a lot of influence. Of course, there are still many big artists that are here with us, and I feel a big pride of having them together with us. But other sectors of the music industry, they have been omitted. And when they didn't omit themselves, they have aligned with the president. I have never seen this on history books. I have always seen art as a form of resistance. I have never seen art being an ally of oppression. Nowadays, what we have been seeing in Brazil is this. And alongside artists and some fake journalists and presenters, we have part of the press giving voice to these people, and we have great digital communicators that are not speaking. And the silence can be as dangerous as an alliance with Bolsonaro. So the silence of these influencers is what brought me to the position that I am today. Because I don't say anything astonishing. I'm not a political YouTuber. I read Brazil as every Brazilian does. I only have a lot of followers. So if these other people were also positioning themselves, I wouldn't be here alone. We would be together. But the vast majority has chosen silence. So this is very bad because when you talk about the youth that now identifies itself with this backward system that repeats conservative speeches, we those silence are also guilty, and the historical payment is going to arrive to them. I I do my part. I ask other artists, musicians, everyone to unite against pressure and not for it. There's no other way to impact the youth than with the creativity, as Paulo has stated. So I hope with all my heart that many of these people who have been silenced, that they decide come to the side of the light and to talk against
Obrigada,
these
Felipe.
people. Thank you so much, Felipe.
Alguém quer completar algum aspecto do
Does
Felipe?
anyone would like to comment
Paulo,
anything?
vai.
I do.
Não. Você tem falado
A-
pouco aqui para o
Am I
Brasil.
talking a lot? No, no, you have been talking little in Brazil. So Philippe was very clear in what he said, but I think this network of fake news has been causing an immense damage to the freedom of expression. To buy those books. What a great idea. What was it? Felipe? The LGBTQ plus books in the event of Books in Rio. I was really jealous of you because I wish I had that idea. I admire it so much. But I think that the moment that we are living is very dangerous because we are not only talking about information, we are talking about boundless information where you can talk anything and people will believe you. So finally, I think that they are not that powerful. I think they are very weak. And they're weak because they're aggressive. A, a strong person is not hysterical.
Obrigada, Paulo.
Thank you so much, Paulo. Now I'm going to direct a question to Pierpaolo. A lot of Paulos here today. Pierpaolo, it's the following. Paulo Coelho has cited the Brazilian Association of Press, who has been doing a very courageous job pointing out these critical things that Brazil has been living, and also going to the Supreme Court. We, as Arns Commission and the OAB, we manifest ourselves in the lawsuit. And in that lawsuit, in this specific lawsuit that I'm going to talk about, there's the subject of judicial harassment against journalists, and maybe this is not a very known reality of the great public. We deal with Patricia's case and other journalists. They're real influential professionals in Brazil, but we need to look at another type of attack over which we don't have many information. I'd like you to explain us what is judicial harassment against journalists. Thank you so much, Laura. This question is very important because at the end, the forms of attacking the freedom of expression takes many forms. The creativity of these people to attack journalists is infinite. So we perceive that since the opening of police inquiries to investigate a report, an article, it doesn't make sense because you don't open a police investigation to investigate a report, whether it violates someone or not. It doesn't make sense to ask Patricia to be part of investigation of a report. What did he mean by calling the president a genocide? He meant what he said. He's a genocide. And beside that, there's the creativity of judicial harassment. So what do you do? There was a case of Elvira Lobato, a journalist who made a report on a church. And in a certain moment, she had more than 300 lawsuits alleging crime against the honor of the institution of which people pertain to. So they felt persecuted on their honor due to that. She had to stop working as a journalist because she had to go from everywhere in Brazil in order to answer hundreds of lawsuits. She has good lawyers, she have a judicial support. So now can you imagine if this is repeated against, imagine a small blogger in a small city, how will this person defend himself? So this strategy is replicated in many situations. So the what we need is the judiciary. I know that our judiciary is complicated, but the Supreme Court and some of its justices are helping us. The Supreme Court has considered the law of press unconstitutional. The Supreme has also, in this case that Paulo Coelho cited, it has maintained the possibility of the LGBT books in Rio de Janeiro event. So the Supreme Court has been an institution to which we can recur to defend the freedom of expression in Brazil. We need to see the judiciary system as an ally, as an important piece in our fight. It is fundamental that we look at the Supreme in order to maintain the democracy in Brazil. If we don't look at the judiciary, he will be destroyed. this space is going to be occupied by people without commitments to the freedom of expression if we don't do something to stop it. So in order to close this final round, I'm gonna I have a question for Paulo Coelho. As I cited a little part of a report in the beginning of our live event, she looks at the world, and now looking at the world, and due to the bad use of social networks, we see that freedom of expression is being attacked not only in Brazil, but elsewhere in the world as well. And you, Paulo, you were, despite your world success, you were also a very persecuted man by countries with fundamentalist visions. It was not only the censorship in Brazil, but abroad as well, you have faced the face of religious fundamentalism, for example. So now, in this life phase, have you been disturbed? That is, did does the movement of fundamentalism still attacks you? I'd like you to talk a little about this, please. Paulo, your audio is muted.
Depende de mim, né? Quer dizer, se eu for dar bola,
It's not only upon
eu
me.
vou me sentir importunado.
If
Se eu não dar bola, porque é absolutamente irrelevante o que
I,
o troll vai dizer, o que um cara vai
it is
dizer.
irrelevant what people are going to say, how they're going to offend me. Yesterday, for example,
Dizendo, a gente tem que
I was
abordar
writing Felipe Santa Cruz saying that we need to approach this subject of military dictatorship. He didn't read it because when I was there, there were only trolls.
faço bloqueio e liquido o
So
assunto.
what do? I block and I go on.
Eu tô
So
reparando que é uma volta sempre.
I have been seeing,
Claro. Há uma-
I'm sorry if I'm very clear, but
Não somos
I'm seeing this victimization of ourselves. We are not victims. We cannot accept the role of victims.
o poder de serem os carrascos.
Otherwise, we're going to give them the power to be our masters. When we give the government the power to be our executors, we are lost.
Exemplo, claro.
So, to cite a clear example, when I went to Iran,
Dado pelo meu editor,
I was invited by my editor,
dos muitos, porque
one of my many editors, because,
né? Mas eu tinha 10
but I had a bodyguard. If I die, it's okay. It's life. It's part of life to die.
no Irã.
And what happened in Iran?
O cara fala o que ele quiser.
Well, the guy is going to talk about whatever he wants. He's going to insult whoever he wants. And it's up to me to accept it or not. When I accept it, I give him power.
Ele vai me dominar.
And when I give him power, he's going to eliminate me. That's a truth.
Que a gente não tem como escapar.
A truth from which we cannot escape.
Tenho uma grande admiração.
So you see, a man that I have a great admiration, Felipe Santa Cruz. I have a bigger admiration for every one of you here, but
O Felipe se
Felipe,
trauma daqueles.
he has gone through such a trauma.
E hoje é o presidente.
He got himself back together, and now he's the president of the Order of Attorneys of Brazil. So I insist,
E o Bolsonaro.
Pierpaolo, that Bolsonaro,
Quem mudou o mundo nesse
he's not well. Just to complete,
com relação ao jornalismo?
who,
Foram jornalistas? Não.
what changed the world regarding journalists? Was it journalists? No.
Boas coisas lá.
It was a guy who stole
E o Assange.
the slogan,
Pessoas que eram hackers.
and people who were hackers.
Trabalhar
One worked at the government,
Daniel Ellsberg,
such as Daniel Ellsberg,
os papéis do Pentágono.
who also published
Então,
some papers.
não éramos
So these people, they were not journalists, but
jornalistas responsáveis,
they
dignos,
they found the responsible journalists,
muitas
and
reformas
this
foram feitas.
made a lot of changes.
Laura, respondendo a tua pergunta,
So Laura, in order to answer your question,
o poder nunca
I don't give anyone, and I have never given anyone power
dizer o que eu tenho que fazer, o que eu não
to
tenho que fazer.
say what I have to do and what I don't have to do.
Se eu sentir atacado, eu chuto. A pessoa
And I don't feel attacked.
toma um chute.
If I get punched or kicked, that's part of the fight.
Obrigada, Paulo.
Thank you so much, Paulo.
Poderia se estender por
Everyone,
horas.
this conversation could take hours. We are on the final minutes of the time that we have programmed.
Uma coisa. Vou
So
propor
I'm going to
mensagem
propose the
final de
following.
cada
I'm
um
going
de
to propose a
vocês.
final message from each one of you of
Mas não mais
1
do que
minute,
isso.
a little more than 1
Eu
minute.
começaria pelos nossos convidados,
And I'd like to
Patrícia,
start with our guests,
Felipe,
Patricia,
Paulo
Felipe,
Coelho,
Pierpaolo,
e os
and Paulo
convidados
Coelho.
finais
And the
eu
last 2
passaria
minutes, I'm
para Zé
going
Carlos
to
Dias e
deliver
Felipe Santa Cruz.
to José Carlos Dias and Felipe Santa
Tempo.
Cruz. So starting with Patricia,
Despedidas e sua mensagem final, Patrícia.
your goodbye
Primeiro eu queria
message. So
agradecer ao
first, I'd
convidado
like to
pela
thank the
gentileza de conversar
opportunity
um pouco, né,
of being
sobre o
here to talk a
cenário.
little about
Eu queria só fazer uma
how the
pergunta então para o
scenario
Felipe
is.
Paulo,
I would only
com
like
relação
to add
a
something to
sermos
Paulo's
silenciados vítimas.
statement. I agree
Quando a
that
gente está
we
falando
must
aqui,
not
por
be seen
exemplo,
as victim,
que a
but I
coisa
think
foi
that we
um
are
processo
talking
de um
here.
inquérito, uma investigação
What happened to
por
Felipe Neto? You have
violência política.
suffered an
Isso é muito
investigation
além de um
for saying
ataque de um
something.
troll, né?
That's
Isso é
more
uma
than
coisa que
attack. That's more than a
representa
troll. That's
instrumentos das
something
instituições da
that
República
they are
de maneira
using. They're using the
irresponsável,
Republic's
né? Para
tools
você silenciar.
in a
Então,
way
por
that
isso
they
é importante a
shouldn't,
gente
in order
denunciar,
to
né?
silence. So it is
E
very
fazer a
important for
reparação
us to
quando isso é
denounce
usado de
this.
forma
We
errada.
have been doing
Mas eu
this,
concordo com você que a
but I
gente
agree with
teve
you.
outros antes de nós, inclusive no
And
governo
many
militar, eles fizeram
others
muito mais,
before us,
de
including during
resiliência
the
mesmo, de fazer
military
a gente vai sair
dictatorship.
maior
We need to talk
dessa
about
situação.
resilience. We are going to
E
end
a minha mensagem é
stronger
basicamente
after
essa. Eu
all
queria
this. And my
agradecer
message is basically
a todos,
this.
estamos
I'd like to
todos
thank
atentos e fortes às
everyone and say
instituições
that we are
deles
all
continuam
attentive
funcionando
and
dentro do
strong,
sistema democrático. Obrigada.
and institutions must
Obrigada,
continue to work
Patrícia. Sua mensagem
democratically. Thank you
final,
so
sua
much,
consideração
Patricia.
final.
Your last
Felipe
message
Neto.
now, Felipe Neto,
Eu quero
please.
agradecer mais uma
I'd
vez o
like to
espaço
thank once
concedido
more
e
the
realmente
space
só
that
só
was
desejar
granted and
tudo
also
positivo até
to
agora e
post
que todos
everything
nós
that
estejamos
we
unidos,
said
porque a
up
gente só
until now.
vence
We
com
all
a
need to
união,
be
essa atitude de
united because we are
silenciamento,
only going
a
to
utilização do
win
sistema
this
jurídico
win over this oppression
para
and these
ser
attacks
assédio judicial e tudo que a gente está vivendo no
and
Brasil. A gente só
making
vence
judicial
com a união
harassments. And we
e
are
com
only
todo
going
mundo
to
se botando
win
ali
with
calados.
union and when
Então a gente
people are
tem
not
que unir de
silenced.
vontade, peito aberto,
So we must
para
all
combater.
unite to
Paulo,
fight
a última
against
frase
this.
que me
Paulo has
marcou
said a phrase that has marked
todo esse
me
evento foi morrer
in
faz parte
this
da vida, então se a
event,
gente vai
which
morrer
is to
tem que morrer
die is to
juntos.
be part of
E
life. So if we need to
eu tenho um
die,
coração mais
we
brando, eu
shall
preciso
die.
dizer que eu prefiro morrer lutando do que viver
Sometimes I say
morrendo
that I prefer to die fighting than live cowardly. So we need to all unite to fight against what is happening and what's going to happen. But yeah,
Obrigada,
we are going to
Felipe,
win.
Pierpaolo,
Thank you so much, Felipe,
você.
Pierpaolo.
E a sua
The floor is
consideração,
yours.
Laura? Você
I'd like to thank you, Laura,
fundamental essa
and the
iniciativa.
Human Rights Council of the
Essa
United
informação
Nations.
que
I'd
você
like to
entendeu
end citing a phrase that I don't know from whom it
que o
is.
paíszinho ele não tinha morrido com
Fascism,
Hitler, não, mas
fascism
você
is
depois
not dead with
tem que acabar com as
Mussolini.
ideias que originaram essas pessoas.
We have
E essas
to
ideias estão aí. As pessoas
destroy the ideas that have originated these people. And these ideas are there. They're not only on Bolsonaro. We are talking about a part of the population that supports this behavior. So every one of us in each action field, we need to fight for freedom of expression. So Felipe Neto in his field, Paulo Coelho in his, Felipe Santa Cruz and you, Laura, I think that everyone We're all doing our part every day, and and shall we continue to do this? Thank you so much
a gente não
for everything that you have been conquering
pelo voto, ou seja, voluntariamente.
voluntarily.
Obrigada, Pierpaolo.
Thank you so much, Pierpaolo. And now the
Paulo
final message from Paulo Coelho.
aproveitar
Well,
que Paulo deu e dizer as
I like to
ideias também as
use
minhas,
Pierpaolo's ideas to add that good
entende?
ideas are not dead, but also bad ideas don't die. Not
Sabe?
that
As pessoas
it's not only
estão aqui,
Nazism that doesn't
as
die.
pessoas estão aqui para lutar
People are here to
pelo
fight for
Brasil,
something.
por participar desse
I'd like
evento
to
primeiro
thank you all a lot for
e
participating in this event,
que
the first event in 2
eu
years.
pergunto uma coisa e eu acrescento,
People only
não sei quem
ask,
disse,
and I add,
não
I
está
don't know who
sabendo
said
o que
this,
está vindo de
that the
fora.
world doesn't know. That's not right. The world knows everything.
Que eu tinha, é,
Of the millions of followers that I had, every one of them
quem é
said, unfortunately, who Bolsonaro is.
vai falar do Bolsonaro,
Ah, you're going to talk about Bolsonaro, a Bolsonaro issue. So yeah,
também
the good
resistem
ideas, they do
e
resist
vão
as well.
resistir e vão
And
vencer.
they're going to resist and win.
E as pessoas que ficaram
Unfortunately, the people who chose darkness,
pagar isso
they're going to pay
com a
for it
própria biografia.
with their own biographies.
Posso acrescentar uma coisa?
And also, can I add something else? Yes, of course, Bolsonaro has done one good thing.
Isso aí.
Acabou com o Moro?
He destroyed the wall.
É a única coisa boa que ele fez.
The only thing that he did
Eu
was
vou
that.
passar agora a palavra
I'm going
ao
to
meu querido
pass the
presidente,
floor
José
to my
Carlos
dear
Dias,
President
para a
José
mensagem
Carlos
final.
Dias for his final message.
muito emocionado, porque eu
I'm very emotional because I think it was a very happy day, this one here, that we have been sharing
na luta
our
pela
emotions
democracia.
and the fight for freedom and democracy. We are survivors.
Dentro daquele meio milhão,
We are not within that half a million dead. And if we are survivors, we need to fight to be survivors also of democracy and freedom. May God bless us.
Zé Carlos, por favor,
Thank you so much,
Felipe,
José
sua
Carlos.
palavra.
Now, please, Felipe, your final message, our
Querido, obrigado pelo
president.
parecer, né?
Thank you so much, Laura, my dear,
Fazendo brilhantemente essa
once
organização dos
again,
trabalhos. Eu quero
making this brilliant organization of our work. I'd like to salute our minister, our master, José Carlos Dias, and say that if there is something that the Order of Attorneys of Brazil is proud of at this difficult moment, and adding on Paulo Coelho's, I think that the period was already worse.
uma espécie de
For
unanimidade da
2
estupidez. A
years,
estupidez, ela
we
está
have been living through the unanimity of
não
stupidity.
havia mais
Stupidity
adversário
is so arrogant
né?
that they
E
thought
achava que a ordem
that they wouldn't
superior
have
dessa
opponents to
comunidade
fight
era parecida com a
against.
comissão Arnes, com a
So
ABI,
this
com a
approach
SBPC,
with
com a Comissão
Arms
Nacional de
Commission,
Tecnologia e Ciências, com a
the
CNBq,
Brazilian Academy
nós
of
nos juntamos, nós
Sciences, we
partimos da nossa
fight
fonte histórica, nós nos
and
juntamos aos
we
nossos
start
aliados de
from our
sempre na
historical
defesa da
perspective.
liberdade, sempre que a
We
vida
are
estava
allied with the
gravemente
same
ameaçada.
allies
Eu
that
quero,
have
então,
always
agradecer
been
ao
with
Zé Carlos,
us.
agradecer aos nossos palestrantes,
So I'd like to
ao
thank José
Felipe Neto,
Carlos,
à Patrícia Campos
our
Mello,
panelists,
ao
Patricia
Felipe
Campos Neto,
Neto,
Felipe
dizer
Neto,
obrigado
to
publicamente
say
em nome
thank you
da
publicly
advocacia aqui
in
da
the name
profissão, que é a
of
ordem dos advogados,
lawyering,
também da
in the name
sociedade
of the
civil.
Order of
Muito obrigado
Attorneys
a
of
vocês.
Brazil who
Muito
defends the civil
obrigado pela fala do
society,
Paulo,
to
que
say
foi
thank you to all of you,
para nós
to say thank you
importantíssima.
to the
É importantíssimo
statement
que
by
é
Paulo
importantíssimo
Coelho,
que
which is very
lideranças,
important to
pessoas
us.
que
It
representam
is very
o que é
important
de
that
melhor no
leadership,
povo brasileiro,
that
diga
people
para o povo
representing the
brasileiro:
best of
não
the
é isso, o
Brazilian
Brasil
people,
não é
to
Jair
say to the
Bolsonaro.
world
A
that
história
Brazil
do
is not
Brasil
this.
está
Brazil is not Jair
escrita
Bolsonaro. The history of Brazil and the history of Brazilian
pequeno tirano.
is
Para
not
encerrar,
this
citando
small
palavras do
tyrant.
Paulo Coelho,
So I'd like
quando
to end with a phrase of Paulo Coelho and also state a
libertação do
concern. I'm a very practical
essa reta
person.
final do governo Bolsonaro.
I am worried about
O
this
rato está
final
cada
stage of
vez
Bolsonaro's
mais agressivo, cada
government.
vez mais agressivo.
When the rat has fear, he's more aggressive. The decrease in his popularity, the decrease of this wall of ignorance is going to make the following months very difficult. There were episodes of violence in big cities. There are episodes of indiscipline in police forces and also in the army forces. We need to be attentive because the next months are going to be decisive to Brazilian institutions. Brazilian institutions won't support the constant attacks. We need to look towards what really is interesting, and we need to overcome this sad part of our history. Thank you so much, everyone, and I'm available to everyone for events like this so we may follow in our struggle. Thank you so much, Dr. Felipe. Our four guests, I thank you all. With the words of José Carlos and our dear Felipe Santa Cruz, I'm not going to repeat. I'd like to say that I'm deeply grateful and touched by your presence, by your testimony in this event. I think that we have done a very important work to inform the international community of what we have been going through in Brazil, and I wish, as Felipe has just said, about the entities that are working in partnership with us. He has already cited the 6 institutions. May we all be together. We must not let anyone behind because we still have a big way forward in defense of freedom of expression and democracy in this country. Thank you so much, everyone. I thank everyone so much, the support team, everyone that made this event possible. Thank you so much. See you later, and good day or good afternoon or good evening to everyone. See you.